LiveaLive was released on July 22nd, 2022 on the Nintendo Switch. So why am I only just getting to it now when it was released in the middle of last year? Released in the same month as Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and I only had time for one of the two. Then of course life happened and I had to put LiveaLive to my back catalog back burner. Thankfully I was able to finally get to it, as it ended up being a short, for an RPG, but memorable experience. It is of course a remaster of a Japanese-only game that released on the Super Famicom in 1994. This original version was directed by Takashi Tokida. He was the lead game designer and scenario writer for Final Fantasy IV, and went on to direct Chrono Trigger after LiveaLive. There have been fan translations in English available via emulation for this, though surprisingly I never played this entry that way before. Now, for an exact comparison between this original version and the new remake, I recommend AustinSV's video, and there will be a link to this video in the description below. Similar to games like Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, this remake was given the beautiful HD 2D treatment. I'd actually argue that out of all of these games so far, LiveaLive probably looks the best on the Switch. Many of the various stories have a number of environments that this looks fantastic on, which is saying something given the over 5-year-old Switch. And regarding the age, the game runs very well with very little slowdown. While there are load screens with information, funny enough, they don't stay on the screen long enough to read because new zones tend to load quick enough. Gameplay sees the player select one of 7 characters that are in their own unique time periods. I'll go over each of these as I progress with my review, as well as my own personal experience with each of them. Based on content creator and reviewer feedback, LiveaLive really is a your mileage may vary type of game. I've heard some individuals stating they liked some stories, hated others, while others loved the whole thing, yet others still just couldn't resonate or even stand it. Regardless of how these stories go, this is a traditional turn-based JRPG through and through. One of many things that make it unique is that there's no money or merchant system at all. Most items and equipment are found, won in battles, or bartered for in a couple of the stories. The turn-based battles occur on a grid-based battlefield where position matters. Player characters and enemies get their respective turns when their action bar fills up. Some attacks are instantaneous, yet others require another action bar for it to fill to fully activate. Player and enemy attacks either attack one specific spot on the field, with the onus on them to ensure their enemy is within the bounds of said attack so that it connects and damages their opponent. All of the attacks for both of the players, characters, and enemies are actually unique special attacks that cost no magic points. In fact, there is no magic point system at all in the game. To that end, one could say that it simplifies it to make it perhaps a little too easy. Regardless, I found some battles to be fun and challenging, while others did become kind of tedious with little reward. Player characters gain a level up once they get 100 experience points, though of course, with level ups, enemies increase experience less and less, depending of course the levels of the said enemies. Certain attacks cause tiles to inflict damage if a player character or enemy sits on them, and these include activating them as fire, water, poison, and lightning. And if more than one character in the party loses all of their health, they can no longer act, but they can be revived just by being healed. If this party member gets attacked when they have no health, they're removed from the battle and cannot come back after the battle is over. One thing that I wish there was in the battles was a fast forward feature with this remake, similar to the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters that they employed. This is because many of the attacks look great, but seeing them repeat over and over and over again using the same length of time would grow pretty tiresome. Finally, I'll have to mention the absolutely fantastic musical score composed by Yoko Shimomura. She is known for other titles such as Street Fighter II, Super Mario RPG, and the Kingdom Hearts series. While the original version on the SNES is great, the HD 2D remaster's fully orchestrated soundtrack does this justice and then some. And I can't fully state just how much the boss theme in the game slaps. Seriously, this theme, called Megalomania, can help pump you up for whatever challenge is coming. And one common theme in these stories that focus on the characters is that Megalomania only plays when they are fighting a boss that has a common thread to the true villain revealed in the final chapter. It's yet another touch to a fantastic musical score, deep-rooted in quality and depth. For this review, I'll be discussing each of the stories that the game is broken down into. This is a game separated by them, which in turn makes it a sum of these parts combined. While all of these stories merge in the final chapter, that is but one of the 9 total chapters available in the game. Once I get to talking about this last chapter, I will make sure to enact a spoiler warning. And an interesting side note that I noticed, the first 8 stories have a heavy lean on Japanese culture. This, of course, isn't surprising since this was a Japan-only release before. Still, out of the 8 said stories, 2 of them are based in Japan, another features a Japanese character as the maker of one of the lead characters, and another is fully Japanese. And I believe this Japanese lean actually serves the stories well, as each chapter takes heavy inspiration from various common media at the time of this game's original creation. The first story that I selected was the Sundown Kids during the Western era. This ended up being my favorite story too. It has absolutely beautiful cinematography, with the soundtrack marrying the environment so well with all the action that was going on. Funny as that sounds, because it was filled with so much swearing, I felt it avoided that kind of dumbed down video gaminess that I've seen other titles in the past use when they say shucks instead of goddamn. In a way, it lent it a sort of credibility to tell an authentic, albeit pixelated story. And in that sense, this story is heavily based on the Western Magnificent Seven, which that itself was based on the Akira Kurosawa film The Seven Samurai. So, wait, does that make this story yet another Japanese one? There were also a few nods to the Western genre itself, such as NPC character names like Wayne and Clint. In a way, I felt like a kid again, watching Westerns with my father. This is also my first experience with Megalomania, and it amazed me how kick-ass it was. Though that boss battle was the third of only 4 total battles I fought in this chapter, it showed me that perhaps this game isn't going to be about the fights, though that depended specifically on what story I was playing. This one's a 10 out of 10. The next story I selected was Cubes, during the distant future. This one only had one battle that I had to do, and that was against the antagonist for the chapter. There were additional other battles you could do in the video game simulation, but I just ignored those. The story itself feels like a mix of Ridley Scott's Alien and the cult classic 2001: A Space Odyssey. Both fantastic movies. Being that there was only one battle, it allowed the cinematics and overall feeling of dread and betrayal permeate very well within the story. Even if I was controlling a robot, that gave me Big Hero 6 vibes. Especially since its designer, Yoshiyuki Kato, reminded me so much of Baymax's creator, Tadashi Hamada. I was totally expecting to be bored with this chapter as well as perpetually lost, but thankfully the story was interesting and the mini-map really helped to show exactly where to go. The irony of controlling one of the only non-human characters in the story wasn't lost on me, as the story itself probably had the largest spectrum of emotions through its human characters that it portrayed. This includes examples such as anger with Huey against Kirk, Rachel's grief, and surprising kindness of the gruff Corporal Darth with Rachel. There's also small touches of refinement I appreciated beyond the cinematics to help with the immersion, such as near the end with the text in the loading screens changing. I'd give this one an 8 out of 10. The third story I selected was Pogo's during prehistory. This one I didn't enjoy as much. One big reason was that there wasn't a single line of dialogue spoken until the very, very end. Obviously, this makes sense since this was before verbal communication could be possible, and I respect that as an art choice. This allowed Pogo, the supporting characters, and NPCs to be quite expressive. The only downside was that sometimes it would make it unclear what the next objective would be. I checked online, and it's possible this story was based off of an anime called First Human Geatrus, but obviously I couldn't confirm that since I've never seen that anime. This story also tends to be the game's primary source of comic relief, with humor bordering on the crude and sophomoric. I personally don't care for fart humor, but my wife loves it, so to each their own. I also had to consult help online for the first time, as I thought I saved myself into a corner before the second boss battle against a character named Gaki or Zaki, or whatever that long-haired Dalton-like guy was named. There wasn't any opportunity to get into battles at that point to raise Pogo's level, and I kept dying. I ended up cheesing the fight by always facing and attacking Gaki's back to proceed forward. To that end, there's a lot more battles in this chapter, much like how the next story I picked ended up being for me. But for this one, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. The next story I picked was the Earth and Heart Shifu's one during Imperial China. This story got back to the cinematic beauty that I originally had saw during the Western story. It's also essentially based off of Chinese martial arts films. It follows an aging martial arts master who senses the end of his life is nigh and decides to teach disciples he finds his own martial arts. He ends up finding the speedy but treacherous Lei Kugo, the humble Yun Zhou, and the eternally hungry Hong Haka. There's an event about 2/3 of the way through the story that results in only one of the 3 of these students being left, and that depends on whomever the Shifu tended to give extra training to. And I hated that, because I made sure to spread out the training evenly, focusing said training on the student whom I felt was the weakest at whatever the Shifu was training on. This story also had some of the most battles out of the 7 original stories available, with the last gauntlet of battles really adding to this. At least this also allowed me to get acquainted with the battle system quite well. I'd give this one an 8 out of 10. The 5th story I selected was Akira's during the near future. This one felt like a smattering of a number of Japanese anime. This includes similar story beats to the anime film Akira, which of course the main character sharing the same name, mech battles a la Gundam, and even a little bit of Dragon Ball Z when Akira's power is unlocked and he gains blonde hair. Hell, even Akira himself kind of looks like a character from Yu-Gi-Oh! And the theme that plays in the beginning when riding the motorcycle really leans into that anime vibe. One cool thing with this story is that it has an overall layout of the neighborhood that kind of gave me an Earthbound vibe with the aesthetics, or even something like Super Mario Bros. 3 in selecting where to explore. I felt like this story tended to run a bit long for me. One reason was the character Dak Tobai, as his general fetch quests ran long and even the swap-out system got tedious. Being that this game doesn't have money or a system to acquire equipment, this was the only way to equip myself. I'm glad the game has the ability to skip scenes, as I was able to skip a great amount of the inane dialogue set within the swap-out system. I'm also glad I spent a lot of time doing said swap-out, as all the accessories ended up being very helpful in the final chapter. Once you find said characters in the final chapter, you gain all of the items and equipment therein that they found in their respective stories. Going back to this specific near future chapter, I generally don't like giant mechs, both in anime and in video games, but this story had enough to where it didn't overstay its welcome. I give this one a 7 out of 10. The 6th story I selected was Obodomaru's during the twilight of Edo, Japan. The castle and its grounds this takes place in reminded me of Final Fantasy IV Advance's extra dungeon of Edge, the Ninjas. He called it a ninja's playground, and I hated that then, and honestly I hated this one too. I also dislike stealth and stealth sections in games, so this one wasn't going to do well with me. I also spent the most amount of time on walkthroughs trying to figure out what to do and where to go here. I got myself pulled out of the no-kill method near the end of my run because I didn't know where to go after I fed these coins into a slot they go into, and there was no way to exit that room, so I ended up having to go through a trap door on the ground. And the battles that are required, I ended up getting one-shotted and killed quite a bit because I had been working actively to avoid battles. And what the heck is up with all the ghosts that were in this particular story and in that castle? Because of that, would the story that this matches with best be Ghostbusters, since Obodomaru ain't afraid of no ghosts? I do like how they insisted on calling them all shinobi and not ninjas, since the latter apparently wouldn't be the correct term for the period. While cinematically beautiful, with an interesting story and a great reveal at the end of who the prisoner actually is within Japanese history, even with all of that, it was still my least favorite story. I'd give this one a 6 out of 10. I saved Masaru in the Present Age's story for last. This one essentially is an homage to Street Fighter II. The main character is extremely similar to Ryu. They both come from Japan, they look similar, and they also fight for the challenge and to be the best. I also love that there's a character select very similar to Street Fighter 2, though of course this decides whom Masato will fight next, as opposed to whom the player will select in battle. Many of these characters are homages to famous fighters in real life too. I loved seeing Max Morgan, since he's quite similar to Hulk Hogan. While I do wish each fighter's stage had its own unique theme, like in Street Fighter 2, each one does have its own unique looking arena to match who Masato is fighting, and he essentially learns each of the fighter's moves by being attacked and taking damage from them. This essentially is the story of the traveling Blue Mage in that way. While this was the quickest of the 7 original stories, I appreciated that, especially after finishing the Twilight of Edo Japan's one. This story is a 9 out of 10. The last character story is Ersted's, located in the Middle Ages. This one doesn't get unlocked until the player completes the first 7 characters stories. The chapter itself is very reminiscent to JRPGs and video games of old, not only with the setting, as that's quite common for older JRPGs, but also with the heroes. The player controls a protagonist that doesn't say anything at all, at least not heard in the written dialogue, which of course is a whole JRPG trope in of itself. He's also a blonde, spiky-haired hero. Where have we seen that before? One thing to note about this chapter is that you'll need to get used to this overall world, as this chapter, which is a longer one, as well as the final chapter, are all played here. The first part of the story is like a standard JRPG trope again, something from Dragon Quest. The princess is kidnapped by the Dark Lord, and it's up to the hero, winner of the King's Tournament, to rescue her, as she's now his bride-to-be since he won said tournament. What starts as standard JRPG fodder quickly dives deep into heavy themes of what it is to be idolized as a hero, and how people prefer to look to said heroes to fix all of their problems. Halfway through, it then goes to what happens when a hero falls from grace, both in death and in life. Okay, now I will be enacting a spoiler warning. From here on out, I'm going to be discussing themes and story beats that could ruin things. Please move to here to the timestamp listed on the screen to avoid further spoilers. You still with me? Okay, so while I wasn't surprised to learn that the real Dark Lord was actually Ersted's best friend, tired of always being in the shadow of Ersted's greatness, it was still a cool twist nonetheless. And it kind of reminded me of Kain from Final Fantasy IV wishing to best Cecil for Rosa's hand. Once Ersted finally bests his former friend, the princess then takes her own life in grief and madness, as apparently she was in love with Ersted's best friend as well. Now, overcome by grief himself as well as with madness and anger, Ersted not only communicates for the first time in the story, he also decides to then become the Dark Lord himself. He believed that being a hero meant beating the darkness, winning the princess's hand, getting glory, despite older companions' warnings during his journey. Having misunderstood what a hero is, Ersted is now on a journey of darkness and hate to convince everyone through non-existence to believe him. This reminded me of 2 stories. The one about a white knight on the hunt to find the Black Knight. The White Knight in his journey commits a number of dark deeds under the thought that as long as he was hunting the Black Knight, they were just. He ends up being attacked one day as another White Knight comes along, because now his armor is as black as the knight he originally hunted. The other story this reminds me of is of the simple quote, and you'll recognize it.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
This story is a 9 out of 10. After Ersted's chapter, the Dominion of Hate chapter opens up, allowing the player to start as one of the 8 characters from the respective stories. I decided to play Ersted's first as I heard it was relatively quick. This involves the player controlling Ersted as Odio, the Dark Lord, where he decides he must defeat the heroes from the other 7 stories by controlling the main villains from said respective stories. Once he does so, he thinks this will show everyone that he was the hero because he was correct in his beliefs about man. The problem is that in victory, he has no one to share said victory with, since he has eliminated everyone from his and all other times. And since there's no one left to contradict him in his views, he can never be proven wrong. We have to believe him. Well, once that depressing ending was done, I could begin this final chapter in earnest by picking one of the other 7 characters. I picked the Sundown Kid as I enjoyed his story most of all, and I heard, and he's quite annoying to recruit in this final chapter. His location changes quite a bit, and he doesn't just automatically join. The Sundown Kid, like the other 7 heroes, are brought into Ersted's realm via the Dark Lord's power to prove to him that his conviction as the Dark Lord was truly the best of all. The next mission, playing as either the Sundown Kid or whomever the player would select, is to find the other heroes and recruit them to the side of good. I found the new Earthen Heart Shifu, which was Hong, first, but I didn't have enough food to feed him and thus couldn't recruit him. While trying to find my next hero, I kept getting bombarded by random encounters that were pretty difficult to beat with just my one hero, so I had to run quite a bit from these battles. It wasn't until I found Akira that I could finally start fighting. I read in one of the walkthroughs during the Middle Ages section that the players should avoid looting the castle in that story as much as possible. These treasures become available and are actually better in this final chapter. I did this and managed to get a bunch of useful items. Combining this with Akira's weapons, armor, and accessories I made with Doc Tobai, as well as finding Masaru, my 3-person party was in pretty good shape. I found Obaru next. He attacked me, beat me, and after restarting, I finally bested him and brought in my 4th ally. I did end up finding enough food for Hong, getting Cube and Pogo as well, but I never actually brought them into my party. I found out later that as long as the player finds these characters and gets the opportunity to recruit them, it's possible to get the best ending. The problem with recruiting them into the party when it's already full is the player must pick someone in the party to be kicked out. If, for example, I would have kicked Masaru out, he would have had to return to where I found him, which was in the castle's dungeon. There's no swappable feature in the menu like other RPGs. I also wish there was a fast travel option on the map that could be brought up with the select button. Many times I had to backtrack back and forth, finding and picking up items and other equipment I had needed, or after finding characters where I felt I could take on a previously unsurmountable challenge, and this got quite annoying. But once the party is formed, the player can find specific trials for each character available in the party. These can be kind of hard to find too. Akira's I found by pure chance. I had to teleport to escape a battle, and it took me out of the middle of Obaru's trial, recognizing the key names from the anime Yu Yu Hakusho, and right into Akira's. This trial brings a lot of supposition to Ersted's motivation, as Akira can communicate with the spirits of all the people that were in Middle Ages Kingdom, which are in Akira's trial. It was here as well that I also had to look into more walkthroughs to make sure I didn't miss anything. Once the trials were complete and my characters were in the mid-20s for the levels, I went back through the Archon's Roost, the Dark Lord's Keep, for what felt like the millionth time. Facing Ersted as Odio the Dark Lord is the standard last boss fare, although the conversation before the battle about what they felt about being heroes was actually pretty interesting. While both phases of this last boss battle were tough at times, I was able to be victorious. Ersted gives the option to finish him off, and I opted not to, as apparently doing so would trigger a very meh ending where the heroes are stuck in that realm. When the heroes walk back to the statues, Ersted reappears and makes all the heroes fight their respective villain in their stories again. This part actually had me sweating quite a bit. This is because while my main 4 characters were in the mid-20s for levels, the other 3 I had not touched since the end of their respective stories. Hong's boss from the Imperial China I was able to beat thanks to some curative items that were in my inventory from my main crew. Cube, I was able to beat his far future counterpart pretty easily enough, honestly, but it was Pogo fighting that damn T-Rex that gave me the hardest trouble. This was a battle by inches, with damage being passed between the two roughly by 40 hit points each, using recovery items I had along the way. I then discovered I had all of Obaru's shuriken to use as throwable items, started doing damage of about 90 to 100 hit points on each turn, and then I finally beat that damn beast. My main 4 easily cheesed their own counterparts, of course. Once the 7 heroes beat their villainous counterparts, Ersted finally admits defeat and realizes that really anybody in the world has the ability to become a Dark Lord if push comes to shove. While this is what normally happens in the original SNES version, the HD 2D remake gets one last crazy-ass battle with Gigalomania playing in the background. My 4 main party members did a great job of kicking the Dark Lord's butt in this final form up until they got trapped in lava and had to get rescued by the other 3 characters. Uh-oh. I barely squeaked by in this phase until finally my main 4 were able to break free. I think the rest of the battle is telegraphed as soon as after all the 7 heroes get trapped again, only for Orchestrated himself to break free from Odio the Dark Lord. In one of the most badass moments of the game, Orchestrated hits Odio with a heavenly strike, finally sealing defeat against this true villain once and for all. And it's with this that he truly becomes the hero he was meant to be. As the Dark Lord, Orchestrated wished for people to believe in him being the hero. In his bad ending, there was no one there physically to believe him being the hero. Now that he actually strikes the final blow, there will be people around with his success, and while they may never know Orchestrated as a hero, we the player know this final heroic deed. I give this last chapter of the story a 10 out of 10 just for this awesome ending alone. Plus, I love a good everyone comes together part of the game. Hell, Final Fantasy VI had this with the World of Ruin, and that's my favorite game of all time. While there's little to no dialogue when they all are coming together, it was still a lot of fun to see them do so. So for funsies, I kind of gave my own ranking of each individual story, but again, this game is a sum of its parts. So my overall rating for LiveaLive, the HD 2D remake, is a 9.5 out of 10. It's a beautiful piece of art, both in its aesthetics and music, with a simple but unique, fun battle system that features a bunch of fun stories that play at media tropes as we know them. It's the combined package itself that is the biggest value, as well as the themes and the message that get put together at the end. That's probably the best part of it all. I also loved and appreciated this only took me 27 hours to complete from start to finish. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was a 120 plus hour affair, so it was nice to play a high quality RPG without the relatively huge time commitment. Now, have you played LiveaLive? Either the original SNES version or this new HD 2D remake? Let me know in the comments section below. Hopefully after seeing my review you will be inclined to play it. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to do so and can't wait to get my hands on the upcoming HD 2D games like Octopath Traveler 2 and the Dragon Quest III remake. Please remember to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Thanks for watching and have a great day.